it says that the per capita cheese consumption is almost 95% correlated with the number of people who died by being strangled in their bed sheets. And that's across the years 2000 to 2009. So across those 9 years, per capita cheese consumption is almost 95% correlated with the amount of people who died by being strangled in their bed sheets.
Hey everybody, before we start the show, I want to make a couple disclaimers. This show does cover a wide variety of topics related to mental health and life in general, and some of those could be sensitive for you. I want to simultaneously encourage you to be brave in consuming difficult content, but also respect and recognize your limitations. So please use your best judgment. I will never be offended if you need to skip a question or an episode entirely, but feel free to feel it out, check out the episode, and just see what happens. If you need to skip, that's okay, but feel free to give it a shot first. I also need to say that while I am a psychologist, I'm not your psychologist, and I'm not your therapist. This is not intended to be direct medical advice, and you should not use this as a substitute for professional help. So with those said, let's go ahead and get into the show.
All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, episode 343. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff, aka Duff the Psych. I make mental health content for real people just like you. And today I have a question and answer episode, 2 really good questions from listeners like yourselves. If you'd like to send me a question, shoot me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. Normally, I would say that you could also use my website to send me a message, but I apparently am a bit of a prophet because last week I was talking about how my website was being held together by duct tape and chewing gum or something like that. And then my website broke. So it is currently broken. We are trying to get it fixed. So if you've tried to visit duffthepsych.com or try to find some show notes, things like that, and realized, hey, something's going on here, it's not just you. The website is down as of March 23rd, 2023. So we're working to get it back up, and hopefully that happens soon, but just be patient while that's happening. In the meantime, if you do need to get hold of me, just use duffthepsych@gmail.com. 2 really good questions here, nothing too intense, and I don't think I have a whole lot to say before diving into it. Pretty wiped this week, so I'm just going to get into the questions and do my best to give some good answers. So this is the first question. It reads, "Hello. My question is about communicating while dissociating. I've been in therapy for over a year, and together my therapist and I have discovered that I apparently dissociate a lot. I never knew that's what was happening, but it feels like my brain shuts down and I lose my ability to speak. I've been working on identifying triggers, and the more I look, the more I find. But what really has me floored is that I apparently dissociate every single time I try to get emotionally vulnerable or ask for help. This has prevented me from building deep relationships with people my whole life. I can't ask for help or tell anyone how I'm feeling if I'm not doing all right because I will shut down. I'm 28 and I'm trying really hard to build meaningful connections with chosen family, but feeling really hopeless and stuck over this. I have some wonderful people in my life, but I can't communicate with them when I really need to. I can't even tell people I dissociate without dissociating. Loving people being kind to me will also make me dissociate. I had an episode recently where I was feeling suicidal, and I'm truly afraid that I will reach a crisis point and I won't be able to reach out for help. Any thoughts on how I can get past this, or tips on how I can communicate when I need help without going into full-on shutdown mode?" Okay, so this is a really good question. I really, really appreciate it. I think that there are probably a lot of people out there who deal with moments of dissociation, both short and long, in varying degrees, even if they don't really know what it is or talk about it. So first off, let's break down what dissociation is. So dissociation is the experience of disconnecting from your thoughts, your feelings, or your sense of identity. There are a variety of different types of dissociation. The most common are called depersonalization and derealization. And they're kind of what they sound like. Depersonalization is when you feel detached from your own body or your surroundings. So this is when you feel like you're sort of elevated above the scene, and it's like you're watching yourself from the outside of your body. Derealization is the feeling that the world around you isn't real, or that it's like not happening to you. That's kind of more of like the dream-like state where things just don't feel real. You could have both. You can have either, sometimes a little bit of both mixed together, and that's certainly possible. And there are also some more severe forms of dissociation. So things like dissociative amnesia, where you actually lose memories, or dissociative identity disorder, where you have multiple identities living within you, different personalities living within you. Fairly rare, but those do exist. We're not going to get into those here because that's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about more of the symptom of dissociation, which I'm guessing has a lot to do with the depersonalization and derealization that I just talked about. You can have dissociative disorders where that's a primary part and that's like kind of the main symptom and that's what you're dealing with. But it's also the case that many people experience dissociation sometimes, right? In the same way that, somebody who doesn't have an anxiety disorder can certainly become anxious, right? Dissociation is an extremely common response to trauma, but that's not the only context in which it can occur. It can happen to people who have depression or anxiety, and people who are just going through a really hard time can also experience dissociation. Things going on with your body might trigger an episode. So there's a lot of different contexts in which it can happen. The dissociation itself is not dangerous, right? So the symptom of dissociation is not dangerous. You're not going to lose yourself or, be unable to come back or something like that. But it can certainly cause some problematic situations, right? When you're out of it, when you're not feeling like you're in control of your body, when you're not feeling like you are participating in the world, you may not be able to really attend to your surroundings and notice what's going on. So, obviously when you're, say, driving or something like that, it could be a problem. I will say, though, for all the people that I've worked with that have dissociation, it's never been something that's led to like an accident. Usually your body doesn't let that happen. But certainly it has been the case that people are like, whoa, how did I get from here all the way across these like 30 miles to here? Maybe I need to stop driving for a bit or something like that. But, in my personal experience as a therapist, I've never seen it cause direct harm to somebody. What you've noticed is that it can impair communication, and that can be frustrating. And I'm sure it is very frustrating for you, right? Especially right now as you gain more insight into what dissociation is and you get more names for your experience. You understand looking back that there's a lot of things that fall under that umbrella. Yet you aren't really able to do something about it yet. So you know what it is, you have a name for it, you have a target, but you're still here struggling with it. And that can be really, really frustrating. So just want to normalize that. Also, I want to reassure you. Remember that, as you said, you didn't know this is what you were going through. So you're just at the beginning of understanding that what you have is dissociation. That's what you've been experiencing. It probably makes a lot of sense in retrospect when you look back at the things that you've been through. But in terms of actually being able to put that name to it and recognize the symptom, that's relatively recent. So in other words, you are early in the process of reducing its impact on your life, right? You're early in the process of trying to recover from it somewhat or get a better hold on it. So you got to have some patience with yourself. I know it's easy to become impatient because you want to get rid of this, but again, you're early in this type of treatment for it. So interestingly, I work with somebody right now in therapy who has a very similar issue. And obviously, because of HIPAA and also just not being a dick, I won't share too many details about this person. But historically, they have dissociated often in their life. And they've gone through periods of time where dissociation is extremely common. And it could be for extended periods, too, where the actual dissociation happens over like a long chunk of time during the day. So for them, basically, dissociation is their sort of default defense mechanism. Whenever their, ego, psyche, whatever you want to call it, needs to be protected, dissociation slides in and says, hey, I got you. You don't have to feel that. Let's just sort of check out. So, when the emotions get too strong, their mind just sort of blanks out, says nope, and dissociates. And this can be frustrating in the sort of lightest times, and it can lead to really dark feelings of hopelessness in the worst times for this person. But interestingly, similar to you, their dissociation also gives them difficulty of not being able to express themselves well. Not like they become unintelligent or something, but the words, it's a struggle to get them out, especially if it has something to do with feelings. So in trying to explain how they feel, trying to get across, something that they experienced that was difficult, it just gets stuck, and in our work together, it was something that I got to see very often. Like I got to see the person sit there and, a prompt comes up. I ask, how something happened, to explain more about something that they were feeling, an event from the past, what have you. And you see it just sort of like this certain look of like trying to access it, but just like nothing will come out, just sort of like a frustrated blankness. And so, yeah, it's something that I have certainly seen directly relatively recently. But I do hope that it's reassuring for you to know that with this individual, through their own efforts, plenty of therapy together, and over time, they've been able to make significant progress, and they are much better able to explain themselves and express themselves, and they dissociate a lot less in general. So, I know it's hard to see the impact that dissociation has had on your life, and, how much it feels like it's held you back in some ways, but you can make progress here. You're not running out of time. You're not hopeless. I think it's very telling that you have people in your life, despite, being dissatisfied with the depth of these relationships. You want to be able to deepen sort of your found family, and the dissociation gets in the way of being able to do that. And of course, when you need help, it's hard to not be able to reach out. So yeah, I understand that, but you do have people that care for you. And there's a reason that they're there, right? This doesn't make you a bad person to be around. And clearly you're able to communicate at least some degree of feelings to them, because how do you have a relationship like that in the first place? So, go easy on yourself about this. And I do want to encourage you that you will have the opportunity to deepen these relationships. Now, I want to talk more about kind of some of the nitty gritty here in terms of, what you can do and things of that sort. But first I need to talk about today's sponsor, which is BetterHelp. So BetterHelp being our sponsor is very appropriate for the question that I'm answering here, although the person already has a therapist. But in general, getting to know yourself can be a lifelong process. We're always growing and changing, and it's not uncommon to have a realization later on in life that sort of reinterprets things that have happened to you previously. I've certainly had this happen where I look back and I go, oh, that's what that was. And then I have to sort of reinterpret and reintegrate all of that stuff. And that can take some processing. It could even take some self-forgiveness depending on what it is that you're discovering and unearthing. And so it's really great to have some support in doing that. Therapy is one great way to get that support, to help you with that self-awareness, with that understanding, and having a gentle guide to be with you on that process. BetterHelp is a great resource for this. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and that'll get you matched with the licensed therapist. And if you find that it's not a good match, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So visit betterhelp.com/duff today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/duff for 10% off your first month. Okay, so let's get back to the content of the question here. So given how this is happening and the specific triggers that you're talking about, also the fact that you're unearthing more and more and more triggers with your therapist, but the specific things of people being kind to you, you trying to express your emotions, things of that sort, I have to imagine that you have had a traumatic past. I could be wrong. Forgive me if I am. And I'm not, telling you that you do. Like if you don't, that's great. But this is very much what it sounds like. Strong hunch here. And if that's the case, doing the work that you are with your therapist, working toward depth and drilling down and trying to target that trauma, I think that could really help with the dissociation, because often dissociation is just the symptom. It's not the underlying cause, right? You have to think about, what is the dissociation protecting you from, or what has it protected you from in the past and now it's still lingering around. So working on that trauma, processing these things with your therapist, that could be extremely helpful, and maybe even surprising in the way that it does impact how much you're dissociating. In terms of what you can do right now to better manage the dissociation, I think there are a few things to consider. First, I would suggest that you try not to be perfectionistic about communication. Just because you can't communicate verbally in a way that you would like to doesn't mean you can't communicate at all. Especially when you're in need, when you're needing support or help from somebody, especially if it's like, you're feeling suicidal or something of that sort, anything is valid. Really anything goes. A text from your phone, a letter, an email, a hand gesture, anything like that. There are many ways of communicating. And I know that you would like to be able to express yourself and your feelings more open and verbally, but when you're in need, anything will do, any port in a storm. Now in therapy, you could also, I'm not sure if you're doing this yet, but you can start writing notes for yourself to reference during session. So things that you want to make sure that you talk about or things that you haven't been able to bring up yet in session. And this can help you remember what to say. And then, of course, same thing applies. Like if you really need to talk about this and you can't get it out verbally, you could also just show your therapist a list. You could point to an item there so that they understand what you're experiencing. They might be able to ask some questions then, right? You might be like, like they're trying to ask, is there anything that you want to talk about? And you sort of blank out and you're like, and then you kind of hand them the list and they say, okay, I see. So you wrote down this. Can you tell me anything about that? And then you might shake your head and they might say, okay, well, can I ask you some questions? And if you can get to some form of communication in that way, that might be a good starting place. I would also say that it could be helpful to have some more patience with yourself. One thing I've noticed with people who have similar experiences to you is that they also get embarrassed or scared when they can't express themselves. So it's like the dissociation happens, and then there's an emotional reaction to that dissociation, right? It's like, oh God, it's happening again. Like I need to get myself out of the situation because I don't feel safe in this way. So you might bail out on a conversation or physically remove yourself from a situation, what have you. Instead, I would ask that you stay there. As I said, the dissociation itself, that's not dangerous. If you're in a safe place, you're going to be okay. And instead of, leaving, escaping a situation, sit there, stay with it. And, maybe you can find some way of communicating that you're having a difficult time communicating, and then just sit with it and see if it passes, see if your ability to express yourself emerges. You might find a way to tell your closest people, the people that are in your found family or your therapist, that, there's trouble going on, right? So maybe like you send them an email or a letter, one of the things we talked about, and let them know, hey, I realize that one of the things I'm experiencing is dissociation. Often when I'm feeling emotions or I'm trying to ask for help or someone's being nice to me, my brain just shuts down and I can't find the words and I feel like I'm not actually there in person. It's very scary and strange, but sometimes if you see me space out, that's what's happening. I feel disconnected and it's hard for me to speak, right? So giving them some baseline there, maybe even directing them to some articles or something. And this would help them understand what you're experiencing. And then rather than escaping from a situation that comes up when you're with them in person, maybe there is a signal. You could put a finger up or like a hand or something like that. And you could, use that as just the barest signal that you can to show if you're being, in that mode, if you're feeling dissociated. And they, you put up that finger, they might go, oh, are you checked out? Are you having a hard time expressing yourself? And then you could just sort of nod and then let them be there, right? So let them be there while you go through this episode. Maybe they can just sort of, you change the topic and settle there with you, or just sit in silence, or, give you hugs or something like that, if that's appropriate. Whatever it is, if you stick with it, your body has a chance to regulate and allow that intensity of the depersonalization or derealization to subside so that you can communicate a little bit better. This is also something, this is basically akin to exposure therapy for anxiety. And you can also do a similar thing with these, dissociative symptoms. Some people will, for instance, go to the base of a tall building and look up like a skyscraper and look straight up at the top, which gives them that sort of vertiginous, unreality feeling. Staring in a mirror for a long time, or even talking about emotions when nobody else is there. There's different things you can do to draw out that symptom so that it doesn't startle you as much, and you can get better and better at coping with it and sort of sliding through it rather than, being scared by it and trying to run away or shutting down completely. If you haven't already, grounding techniques are also an important thing to learn and practice. These are to help you try to reconnect and stay more present in the moment, connect back to your surroundings. There are a lot of different ones out there. You could certainly do some searching. One of my favorites is what I call sensory bingo, where you focus on each of your 5 senses and you try to engage or at least observe something in the environment, right? So I can touch my microphone here and feel the fuzziness, the tactile sensation of the fuzziness on the microphone. Sorry, this is becoming a little impromptu ASMR video or recording. But I could touch that, or I could, grab an ice cube to feel something really cold, anything like that. You could feel something. I can look and try to observe something about my environment that I haven't noticed, or something beautiful or striking. I can find a smell that I like or dislike, something to engage that, or just observe what I smell. If I'm walking through town and I could smell different smells from the environment, focus in on those. And you just go through each of your senses and just pull something out to root you in reality and recognize that you are there in an environment and you're a part of it. You guys know that I love mindfulness, but I think that mindfulness meditation could be extremely helpful here as well. Primarily, what I think it would do is allow you to be more present and not thrown off by the fact that you're experiencing some dissociation or communication problems. So it's not going to necessarily solve them, but it will help you be more rooted and present. And the way you do that is, again, there's any number of ways you can look up, but you essentially set aside some time to practice this, and you do need to practice it as a skill. But you sit down or get in a comfortable position. It's not necessarily a deep breathing exercise, but you can allow your breathing to become more steady. And then you focus on something. It could be focusing on the sensation of your breath. It could be focusing on a visual like a candle flame. It could be, patting your legs and focusing on the rhythm of that. Whatever it is, you have a focal point. And then because you're human, your attention is going to drift away from that. You're going to start thinking about other stuff. You're going to lose the focus on that. And the idea there is that instead of fighting back against it, instead of saying, oh crap, like, no, go away thought, go away feeling, whatever it is, you instead get curious about it and give it a moment of recognition. You say, okay, I am thinking about how I suck at meditating and I'm never going to get the hang of this. And then you say, okay, that is what's happening. And you try to be not judgmental about it. You try to not say, oh, that's stupid, or I'm bad, or, that's inconvenient, whatever. And you instead say, okay, that is what it is. And then you try to focus your attention back on whatever it was you were focusing on. And it's that shifting of the attention back and forth that's the real practice here. And you can become more and more adept at that switching. And that will allow you to, again, be less thrown off by things like experience dissociation or experiencing anxiety, something of that sort, right? So it allows you to attentionally shift where you're focusing in a more efficient way. And I think that's really valuable here. So those are a few ideas of things that you can do, starting now to work on this. I really appreciate you writing in. I think that your concerns are totally understandable, and it's very difficult to not be able to communicate your needs. And I see where that could sort of turn into worst case scenarios. But I'm proud of you for thinking about this. I'm proud of you for prioritizing your needs. I strongly think that this can improve, and especially with therapy, diving deep in therapy, working on that trauma, if it is there, working on some modifications to the way that you try to communicate, as we talked about, building some coping strategies. There's definitely progress to be made here. So thank you and best of luck. Okay, second question reads, I am a 25-year-old female. I'm not too sure if this question is way too out there. I looked to see if there was anything on this topic and couldn't find anything. I'm struggling with masturbation, not actually doing it, but what happens after. Every time I masturbate, something bad always seems to follow. Here's an example. I recently hurt my shoulder, and it just so happened to happen the day after I masturbated. I'm struggling the most because I've lost a lot of weight, 100 plus pounds, so being active is very important to me. I am now in long-term therapy and have been with the same therapist for over a year. I'm not sure if this is related, but I did recently get diagnosed with ADHD, and I've decided to not medicate yet. Thank you for taking time to read this. I love your podcast, and it's helped so much. Well, hello, and thank you. Thanks for the compliments, and thank you for writing in what's probably a pretty vulnerable question. If anybody has sensitive ears, I'm going to be saying the term masturbation a lot here, so just be aware of that. I'm going to get straight to the point in terms of kind of the overall thesis, and then I'll go into more detail. In all likelihood, your masturbation has nothing to do with the other bad things that have happened to you. I think that probably what's happening here is what we call an illusory correlation or a spurious correlation. They're kind of different, but very closely related terms. Let me explain some of the terminology. So a correlation is what happens when two things happen concurrently, meaning they happen at the same time, they go up together, they go down together. So for example, there might be a correlation between the amount of people in a school and the number of absences overall. right? Because more people, more of a likelihood that people are going to become absent. So there's going to be more absences, right? So they correlate together. More people in the school, more absences go up. You may have heard the term that, or like the phrase, correlation does not mean causation. And what that means is basically that just because things tend to happen together, that doesn't mean that one caused the other. There could be an outside factor that better explains the correlation. For example, a lot of textbooks will use the example of crime rates, so rates of violent crimes being correlated with ice cream sales. So as ice cream sales rise, so do violent crimes. And it's pretty obvious, that ice cream isn't making people commit more crimes, but it could be that the hot weather makes tempers flare, and also that makes people want to buy more ice cream because it's hot out, right? So it's sort of a fake connection that your brain makes because these two things tend to happen together. And you can actually find a lot of funny and interesting correlations online. If you just Google spurious correlations, and I'll try to include a link in the show notes once my website's back up, but I'll put a link in the show notes for a website. But if you just Google spurious correlations, it's probably the first one on Google. But there's a website that tracks them, and there are some hilarious ones. You can see graphs for them and exactly how correlated they are. But I found one when I was working on this episode where it says that the per capita cheese consumption is almost 95% correlated with the number of people who died by being strangled in their bed sheets. And that's across the years 2000 to 2009. So across those 9 years, per capita cheese consumption is almost 95% correlated with the amount of people who died by being strangled in their bed sheets. Right? Like, you would have to really, really, really find some mental way to stretch the explanation of how cheese consumption could cause death by bed sheets, or that death by bed sheets could cause cheese consumption. So there's some really, really interesting ones. There's like correlations between the amount of people that died in pools versus the amount of films that Nicolas Cage starred in, and a lot of stuff that just by chance happens to be very, very correlated. So for you, it may be true that at times bad things have happened to you, or bad things have happened in your life around the time that you've been masturbating, but that does not imply causation, right? There's nothing about masturbation that would make those things occur. Probably. There could be exceptions, obviously, right? You talked about losing a lot of weight. If we're talking about something related to blood pressure, if you have issues that impact your blood pressure, if you have what we call like orthostatic hypotension, where your blood pressure drops easily and that makes you dizzy or faint, it could be that having a strenuous masturbation session or an orgasm could make you more prone to falling or something like that. But I don't think that's what we're talking about here. Another thing that you should probably keep in mind is just how often you're masturbating, right? If you do it on most days, then you're really giving yourself a lot of opportunities to erroneously correlate that masturbation with some other event. Like, I was thinking about things that I could do that are similar, like different spurious correlations I could think of in my life. And I could probably, make a convincing argument that mass shootings are caused by me driving on the freeway, because I drive so frequently. And unfortunately, mass shootings happen so frequently, especially this year, that it's easy to correlate those things, right? So it's like, well, every time I hear about a mass shooting, I'm on the road. So obviously those things are correlated. But, that's just because I drive so much. It's just because of how frequently those things occur in general, right? So if you're getting yourself off all the time, then yeah, there's definitely going to be times where that lines up. So, I think the thing to think about is that even though it may be true that sometimes bad things happen to you after you masturbate, it's probably also true that many good things or neutral things happen to you as well. And you're just not really attributing those because the negative stuff holds a lot more weight. Really, that's kind of how trauma works, right? With trauma, when we've gone through something and it traumatizes us, we make these really strong associations that eventually become trauma triggers for us. So sensory experiences, places that we've been to, or certain smells or sights, other sensory cues. When we had something disturbing happen to us and that traumatized us, suddenly those cues are associated with that event. So, for instance, maybe you were on a bus and somebody had a heart attack and died right in front of you. Very traumatic event. And now you have a fear of buses or maybe motor vehicles in general. And there's, probably no causal relationship there. It wasn't being on the bus that killed this person, but you associate the two together. And so now you have that fear. One interesting aspect here is that you said you were diagnosed with ADHD. And it makes me wonder if maybe ADHD is a common factor between both the masturbation and the bad events in your life. And this might be a stretch, but what I mean is somebody with ADHD might be driven to, masturbate more often for the sensation, like just seeking sensation, or as a means to procrastinate. It's a good way to procrastinate, right? And then somebody who has ADHD might also be more likely to get themselves into harmful situations, being due to being somewhat more careless or not really paying attention to the environment very much. So tripping or hurting yourself in various ways. Sometimes, if you have hyperactive ADHD, you might be more impulsive and make poor decisions. So, that could be something that similar to the way that example of ice cream and crime, there's that separate factor that drives both of those. It could be that the ADHD drives both of these things and they're not actually related to one another. Another thing that strikes me in the question is the example you provided. So in the question, you mentioned that you hurt your shoulder the day after you masturbated. And the day after, that's what struck me. That's quite a bit of time between these two events, right? And I wonder why you didn't associate the hurting of your shoulder with something else, like something that actually happened on the same day of hurting your shoulder. Which leads me to my next thought. I don't know about your history, but do you have some shame related to masturbation? Is it something that there's like kind of a deep-rooted shame or some sort of emotional difficulty about, things like religious or sexual trauma, things of that sort? I don't know that that's for sure, but, of all the things you could choose from to make that correlation in your mind, why masturbation? Right? Why not, again, driving or putting on a certain pair of shoes or the song you listened to that morning or something like that? Your brain is making the connection between specifically masturbation and things that are happening up to a day later. So if I were your therapist, I would want to dig into that a bit. If there's something that gives you this negative feeling about masturbating, then maybe you would be more likely to misattribute the negative things that happened to you to that. Sort of a bit of a confirmation bias, right? Similar to, I think of people who are like religious and they're like, oh, well, you sinned or you did something, that was not in line with the religion. So therefore this bad thing happened to you. It's kind of similar to that. So yeah, those are really my thoughts for you. Like, no, your masturbation is not causing bad things to happen to you. It most likely, I'm 99% certain of that with these very, very, very few exceptions. I think that you could obviously go further in terms of like pathologizing this and thinking about, okay, are there mental health issues that are causing this sort of thinking? But I don't think that's really valuable or relevant here. I would just say keep talking to your therapist and rest assured that you're not causing bad things to happen by getting yourself off. There's nothing negative about it. It's great for you. It's healthy for you. There's no reason to worry about that. But thank you for writing it in. And I hope that this does give you a little bit of reassurance. And with that, everyone, this has been episode 343 of the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. If you'd like the full show notes, you're going to have to wait until my website's up. But then at that time, it will be duffthepsych.com/episode 343. And if you want to send me a question for a future episode of the show, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. Take good care of yourselves, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.